My name is Claire. I used to get praised for being so independent. It sounded like a compliment until I realized it was just a polite way of saying, we don't have to show up for you. Last Thanksgiving, one dinner in my mom's old house finally proved what I'd spent my whole life pretending not to notice. Not with yelling, not with tears, with a single document on the table that nobody could talk their way around. If you've ever been the easy kid, stay with me because this isn't about success. It's about responsibility. And if this hits home, please like, share, and subscribe. The house sat just off the highway, tucked into the foothills of Northern California, the kind of place you'd miss if you blinked while driving past. A weathered wooden exterior, a porch that creaked when you stepped on it, and windows that always seemed to hold onto dust no matter how often they were cleaned. It wasn't poor. It wasn't fancy. It was what people like to call comfortable. Inside that house, comfort had a very specific meaning. It meant keeping things quiet. It meant not asking questions that might stretch dinner too long. It meant swallowing words that could turn into arguments. Around here, silence wasn't awkward, it was polite. Silence was how you showed respect. Silence was how you kept the peace. That was the rule I grew up with, even before anyone said it out loud. In our family, Ryan was the story. He always had been. His ideas, his plans, his potential. Those were the things that filled the room. My mom, Margaret, could talk about him with the kind of energy people usually save for things they believe in completely. When Ryan walked in, her posture changed. Her voice lifted. It was like the air itself leaned toward him. I learned early where I fit in that equation. I wasn't the disappointment. I wasn't the problem child. I was something quieter than that. I was the one who didn't need much, the one who was easy. The one people described with a smile that sounded like relief. Claire's fine, my mom would say. She's always been so independent. It was meant kindly. I think that's important to say. My mother wasn't cruel in the obvious ways. She loved through expectation. She believed that pushing Ryan harder was love, and she believed that not worrying about me was proof I was strong. But there's a difference between believing in someone and checking out of them. My dad, Thomas, played a different role. He worked long hours, came home tired, and carried this quiet belief that staying out of things was the same as being fair. When my mom decided something, he nodded. When tension showed up, he changed the subject. He wasn't loud. He wasn't angry. He was absent in a way that felt intentional, like silence was his way of staying clean. Looking back, I realized something uncomfortable. His silence had weight. It shaped the room just as much as my mom's expectations did. In that house, we didn't argue. We didn't confront. We let things slide. And over time, letting things slide started to feel like the same thing as agreement. Ryan got chances, a lot of them, chances to try, to fail, to regroup, to be reassured. Every stumble came with a cushion. Every setback came with encouragement. When he talked, people listened. When he struggled, it was treated as temporary, fixable. When I stayed quiet, it was treated as proof that everything was fine. No one ever said, Claire doesn't matter. They didn't have to. The structure said it for them. There's a moment I remember clearly, though at the time it felt insignificant. We were sitting at the table, not a holiday, just a regular night. Ryan was explaining another idea, something he was excited about. My mom leaned in, asked questions, offered suggestions. My dad nodded along. I was there too. I had something I wanted to say. Not urgent, not dramatic, just something about my day. I waited for a pause that never came. And eventually, I stopped waiting. That's how it worked. You learned the rhythm. You learned when to speak and when to disappear. And if you learned it well enough, no one noticed what you'd given up. There's a phrase people use for kids like me mature for their age. It sounds like praise. It sounds like strength. But sometimes, it's just what happens when a child realizes there's no one coming to catch them. I'm not saying my parents intended harm. I don't believe that. I think they believed the story they told themselves that one child needed more and the other could handle less. That story made their choices feel reasonable, even kind. But stories, when repeated long enough, become rules. And rules shape outcomes. In our house, the rule was simple. Ryan needed attention. I needed to stay out of the way. And for a long time, I did exactly that. I didn't become quiet overnight. It happened slowly, in moments so small they didn't seem worth mentioning at the time. No one ever sat me down and said, "You don't matter here." What happened instead was subtler than that. It was the way conversations moved on without me, the way questions landed on everyone else first, the way decisions were made, and I was informed afterward if I was informed at all. If I didn't speak up, no one noticed. And if I did, it usually felt inconvenient. So I learned something early. Being low maintenance made life smoother, not just for them, for me. At dinner, I always chose the same seat, the one closest to the window, close to the edge of the table, close to the exit. Not because I planned to leave, but because it felt safer knowing I could. That seat didn't block anyone. It didn't demand attention. It existed on the margin, and somehow, that felt right. I learned to refill my own glass before anyone had to ask. I learned to finish my homework without help. I learned not to interrupt when Ryan was talking, because he was always talking about something important. When something bothered me, I dealt with it privately. When I was confused, I Googled. When I needed reassurance, I told myself I didn't actually need it. People praised me for that. She's so mature. She doesn't ask for much. She's independent. Those words followed me for years, and I wore them like proof that I was doing something right. But here's the part no one explains. Independence can be a skill, or it can be a survival strategy. And when it shows up too early, it's usually the second one. There's a difference between a child choosing to stand on their own and a child realizing no one is coming. From the outside, they look exactly the same. From the inside, they feel completely different. When you grow up emotionally unattended, your brain adapts. It stops asking. It stops expecting. It learns that needing less keeps things calm, that wanting less keeps you safe. So you shrink your needs until they fit into the space no one else is using. That's what being the easy child really is. No one checked in when I went quiet, because quiet was the goal. No one stood up for me when I was dismissed, because I didn't make a scene. And over time, that silence started to feel like part of my identity. I told myself I liked being independent. I told myself I didn't need help. I told myself I preferred it this way. And maybe part of that was true. But it wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth was that independence became my armor. It protected me from disappointment, from rejection, from the risk of reaching out and being ignored again. What people don't realize is that kids who don't ask for attention usually aren't strong, they're trained. They've learned that attention is either unavailable or conditional, and rather than keep failing at asking, they adapt by disappearing. That kind of independence looks impressive, but it comes with a cost. You grow up believing your value comes from how little you need. You measure your worth by how quietly you can carry your own weight, and you hesitate to rely on anyone, even when you should. Looking back, I can see it everywhere, in how I never asked for help, even when I was overwhelmed, in how I downplayed my wins so no one would feel uncomfortable, in how I left rooms emotionally long before I ever left them physically. No one told me to vanish. I just learned that being visible didn't change anything. So I became efficient instead, self-sufficient, reliable, invisible. And here's the thing that's hardest to admit when a family praises a child for being no trouble. They're often praising the absence of need, not the presence of strength. Because strength asks to be seen. Strength takes up space. Strength believes it deserves care. What I learned wasn't strength. It was how to survive without it. And by the time anyone noticed how capable I'd become, they mistook the result for proof that I never needed them in the first place. Ryan always had something happening. That's how my mom said it. Like it was a permanent state of being. Like he didn't just have a plan, he had destiny. Even when he was sitting on the couch in sweatpants. Even when he'd just quit another job. Even when he was between big things. My mom talked about him the way people talk about a storm that hasn't hit yet, but definitely will. Ryan's figuring it out. She'd say, he's so smart. He just needs the right opportunity. And I want to be careful here. Because this isn't me saying Ryan never tried. He did. He had energy. He had confidence. He had a mouth that could turn an idea into something that sounded like it was already real. The problem was, the idea always came before the work. He'd talk about starting a business like it was as simple as buying a domain name. He'd announce he was going to pivot like he was already a CEO. He'd have meetings with people he barely knew and come home saying, this could be huge. And every time he stumbled, every time something fell apart, my mom didn't treat it like information. She treated it like an emergency, like her job was to protect the story of him, no matter what reality said. Sometimes that protection looked like money, not in some dramatic, obvious way, more like little rescues that added up. A bill that got quietly paid, a loan that never got mentioned again, a car repair that somehow became my mom's responsibility, an argument with a landlord that turned into my dad making a phone call. It was always framed as temporary, a bridge, just until he got back on his feet. But the bridges never ended. They just became the road. And the more he was rescued, the less he learned how to rescue himself. That's the part people don't like to say out loud. Being the favored child doesn't always make you stronger. Sometimes it makes you softer. Sometimes it makes you fragile in a way no one notices until life stops cushioning you. Ryan was praised for things he hadn't finished yet. He was applauded for potential, for intention, for confidence. And when you're rewarded for those things long enough, you start to believe they're enough. You start to believe you deserve outcomes without consequences. And I watched that happen in real time. He'd fail, and the family would treat him like a victim of bad luck. He'd mess up, and someone would explain it away. He'd hurt people, and my mom would call it stress. Meanwhile, I learned to make myself smaller so no one had to explain me. If I struggled, it was private. If I succeeded, it was nice. If I complained, it was too much. And my dad was always there, physically. He was at the table. He was in the house. He heard everything. But his contribution was almost always the same. Let's not turn this into a thing. Your mom's just worried. Ryan's under a lot of pressure. Can we not do this right now? At first, I thought he was trying to keep the peace. Eventually, I realized he was protecting himself. Because if he admitted what was happening, he'd have to do something about it. He'd have to pick a side. He'd have to risk my mom being angry, or Ryan feeling exposed. And he didn't want that. So he chose the easiest version of fatherhood, the one where you stay calm, stay quiet, and convince yourself neutrality is fairness. But neutrality in an unfair system isn't neutral. It's support. It keeps the system running exactly as it is. That's how favoritism becomes normal. Not through one big cruel decision, but through 1,000 small ones that never get challenged. And I don't think my mom understood the damage she was doing, not at the time. I think she thought she was being a good parent. She thought she was investing in the child who needed her most. But what she was really doing was teaching Ryan that someone would always catch him. And she was teaching me that no one would. There's a kind of parenting that looks like love from the outside because it's active, it's involved, it's intense. But when it's uneven, when it's always pointed in one direction, it creates two different kinds of broken. One child grows up thinking they have to earn scraps of attention by being invisible. The other grows up thinking attention is automatic and responsibility is optional, and both of them pay for it later. I didn't hate Ryan. I wasn't even jealous in the way people assume. I was mostly confused. Because if I was doing everything right, staying out of trouble, taking care of myself, not asking for anything, why did it feel like I was still the one being treated as the problem whenever I spoke? That question sat in my chest for years, and Ryan never had to ask it. He was too busy being saved. I didn't build my life in a clean office with a glass door and a title on the wall. I built it in a converted warehouse with uneven floors, bad lighting, and a space heater that only worked when it felt like it. During the day, I worked. Real work. The kind where you answer emails you don't want to answer, explain the same thing 3 different ways to the same client, and fix problems no one will ever thank you for. At night, I learned. I taught myself how systems worked, how money moved, how decisions stacked on top of each other. I learned what questions to ask before saying yes. I learned how to say no before a bad yes could cost me months. No one in my family knew the details. Not because I was hiding them, but because no one ever asked. There was never a call that started with, "How are you holding up?" No message that said, "Do you need help?" No curiosity about what my days actually looked like. And maybe that sounds small, but over time, it teaches you something very specific. Whatever you're building it alone. I didn't chase shortcuts. I didn't chase attention. I didn't chase the kind of wins that look impressive in a conversation but collapse under pressure. I turned down deals that felt wrong. I walked away from people who wanted speed instead of structure. I chose slow progress over fast praise, even when it hurt to watch others get applauded for doing less. That wasn't discipline. It was caution. When you don't have a safety net, you learn to check every step before you put your weight down. I documented everything: conversations, agreements, changes, not because I was paranoid, but because I'd learned what happens when things go wrong and there's no record. I learned that credibility isn't something you announce, it's something you can prove. And here's the part I want to be very clear about: the thing that made my path different wasn't talent, it wasn't luck. And it definitely wasn't money. It was process. I didn't build something flashy. I built something that worked. I didn't rely on promises. I relied on patterns. I didn't wait for permission. I waited for confirmation. That's the kind of growth that doesn't look impressive until it's too solid to ignore. From the outside, it probably looked quiet, uneventful, even boring. But that quiet was earned. Every choice I made was shaped by one question: can this survive without anyone rescuing me? If the answer was no, I didn't touch it. Meanwhile, back home, the dynamic never changed. Ryan's plans were still discussed like they were already real. My mom still talked about his future like it was just around the corner. And my dad still believed that, as long as no one was yelling, everything was fine. No one connected my absence to independence. No one wondered why I never needed help. No one stopped to ask whether not asking was a choice or a habit learned too young. I think people assume that when someone builds something on their own, it's because they wanted to. Like independence is always a preference. Sometimes it isn't. Sometimes it's what happens when you realize the people who are supposed to show up don't. So you stop waiting. You don't announce your progress because there's no audience. You don't look for validation because you've learned it's unreliable. You don't ask for permission because you've learned silence can mean no. What you build in that space tends to be different. It's quieter, stronger, less fragile. It doesn't depend on applause to stand up. And that's why, when people later ask how you did it, they expect a dramatic answer, a breakthrough moment, a lucky break. The truth is much less exciting. I paid attention. I kept records. I made decisions that didn't feel good in the moment but made sense long term. And I did it without anyone in my family ever asking, "Are you okay? Or do you need support?" That absence didn't stop me, but it shaped me. Because when you grow up knowing no one is coming to save you, you don't build for show. You build for survival. You build for proof. And one day, that proof becomes something no one can talk their way around. I know what you're thinking. After everything I just told you, why would I go back? Why would I walk into that house again? Sit at that table again? Let those familiar dynamics wrap around my throat like they always did? And honestly, I asked myself the same question, because on paper, the logical answer is simple. Don't go. Protect your peace. Stay away. Move on. But real life doesn't always run on logic, especially when it's family. Here's something people don't say out loud. Very often the person who was hurt the most is usually the last one to fully let go. Not because they're weak, because hope is stubborn. Hope doesn't die just because it should. Hope doesn't listen to your pride. It just keeps showing up in the background like a soft, ridiculous voice that says, maybe this time will be different. And when you grow up emotionally neglected, hope takes a specific form. It becomes a project. You start believing that if you just become the right version of yourself, more mature, more successful, more calm, more understanding, then the people who ignored you will finally see you. You don't even realize you're doing it. You just keep upgrading yourself like that will fix the relationship. So you come back, not to be hurt again, but to test one question you've been carrying for years. If I'm not small anymore, will they treat me differently? That question is heavy, and if you never get an answer, it follows you into everything, into friendships, into relationships, into how you handle conflict, into how you measure your worth. So yeah, I went back. But I didn't go back the way I used to. I didn't go back as the little kid hoping to be chosen. I went back as an adult who needed clarity. And that meant I set conditions. I stayed somewhere else. Not in that house. I got my own space, my own key, my own exit. I rented a small place a short drive away. Nothing fancy. But it was mine. It meant I could leave without a fight. I could breathe without being watched. I drove myself. I didn't carpool. I didn't rely on anyone. I parked in a way that wouldn't trap me in the driveway. That might sound extreme, but when you've spent your whole life being cornered by guilt and family expectations, you learn to build small exits before you need them. I chose when I arrived. I chose what I brought. I chose how long I would stay. And most importantly, I chose the reason. I wasn't going to Thanksgiving to prove I was lovable. I wasn't going to win affection. I wasn't even going to confront them. I was going to observe, because sometimes you don't need another conversation. You need evidence. You need to see, with adult eyes, what you spent years explaining away. When you're a kid in that environment, you normalize everything. You make excuses. You shrink your feelings. You tell yourself it's not that bad, because admitting it's that bad would break your idea of home. But when you're older, and you've built a life outside of that system, you can finally see the pattern clearly. And that's what I needed. I needed to know whether my family had changed or whether I had just gotten better at pretending I wasn't hurt. Because if they had changed, then maybe there was something to rebuild. Not perfectly, not magically, but honestly. And if they hadn't changed, then at least I'd stop negotiating with a fantasy. That's the part people misunderstand. Coming back isn't always about forgiving. Sometimes it's about finishing a story your nervous system never got to finish. It's about closing a loop. When you've lived in emotional limbo for years, your mind keeps looking for an ending that makes sense. It keeps revisiting the same questions, the same memories, the same moments where you think, if I had said it differently, if I had been better, if I had tried harder. Going back one last time isn't always self-betrayal. Sometimes it's the last honest check. It's you standing in the same room with the same people as the person you are now, and letting reality answer the question your childhood never could. And in my case, Thanksgiving wasn't a weakness. It was a controlled experiment. A final chance given under my terms not to earn love, but to confirm the truth. Because the truth, even when it hurts, is still better than spending the rest of your life trying to win affection from people who only know how to love you when it benefits their story. So I went back, not to be chosen, to see. When I pulled up that evening, the house looked exactly the way it always had, like time moved slower there on purpose. The porch light was on, casting that dull yellow glow that makes everything feel a little older than it is. Through the front window, I could see movement and shadows, plates being carried, someone leaning in close to laugh. The smell hit me as soon as I stepped out of the car. Roasted turkey, gravy, something sweet and buttery in the oven. It was the kind of smell that's supposed to make you feel safe. And for a second, it almost worked. I walked up the steps, heard the familiar creak under my shoes, and it was like my body remembered the rules before my brain even had time to think. Don't make it weird. Don't bring up anything heavy. Smile. Be polite. Be grateful. Inside, the dining room was warm, crowded in that cozy way people romanticize. The overhead light was still the same old fixture, the one that turned everyone's skin a little gold and made the corners of the room disappear. The long wooden table was set like a stage, plates lined up, napkins folded, serving dishes waiting like props. And the seating. The seating was already decided. Ryan was closest to my mom, Margaret, like he always was, right within her reach. Right within her orbit. The place where conversation naturally flowed. The place where you didn't have to fight to be heard. My dad, Thomas, took his usual spot across from her. Not too close, not too far. A position that let him watch everything without committing to anything. And me, my seat was near the window, near the end. Near the space you can slip out of without everyone turning their heads. No one said, sit there. No one had to. That's the thing about family dynamics, they don't need instructions. They're habits. They're muscle memory. They're an invisible map everyone follows without admitting it exists. My mom greeted me with the right words, the kind that sound caring if you don't listen too closely. Oh, Claire. You made it. Traffic okay. It wasn't cold. It wasn't warm, either. It was polite. Like the way you greet someone you genuinely don't dislike, but don't really know what to do with. Then she turned back to Ryan before I even fully sat down. And that was the part that stung. Not because it was shocking, but because it was expected. Ryan was already mid-story. Something about a new opportunity, a new connection, a plan. He spoke with that familiar confidence, like the details were optional but the excitement was mandatory. Margaret leaned in, eyes bright, asking follow-up questions like she was hosting an interview. So what does that mean? Exactly. And when would you start? Oh, Ryan, that's incredible. See, I told you. I told you it would come together. She said I told you like she'd been right all along, like belief was the same thing as proof. Thomas nodded quietly. He didn't interrupt. He didn't challenge. He just confirmed the mood, because that was his job in the family. Not to lead, not to correct, to keep the current steady. When my mom finally looked back at me, it was like remembering a checkbox on a list. And you? She asked. Work still. Busy. It wasn't a real question. It was a courtesy. A pause before returning to what mattered. Yeah, I said. Busy. That was all it took. That was all the space I was given. The thing that hurts isn't always the obvious disrespect. It's not always someone yelling or calling you names or making you cry. Sometimes it's a room full of people who think they're being perfectly nice, while you slowly realize you're not actually part of the story they're telling. And Ryan had a way of keeping you aware of where you stood without sounding cruel. He looked over at me with that half smile people use when they're joking, but only because they know the joke will land. Claire's always been the responsible one, he said, carving into the turkey like he owned the moment. She's basically allergic to fun. He chuckled at his own line. My mom laughed too, like it was charming, like it was proof of closeness. I smiled, because that's what you do when you've trained your face to survive. But inside, something tightened, because what he meant wasn't responsible. What he meant was small, predictable, safe, not a threat. Then he added, casually, like it was nothing. Honestly, I don't know how you live like that. You've always been, low-key, low-key. It's such a harmless phrase on the surface. It sounds like a compliment, like you're calm, like you're grounded. But in that room, coming from him, it was a label, a box. The one you put someone in when you've decided their life doesn't need to be taken seriously. And the worst part wasn't even Ryan saying it. It was that no one reacted. No one corrected him. No one asked what I was actually doing. No one noticed how quickly the conversation swallowed me again. Because in that family, the hierarchy wasn't enforced with cruelty. It was enforced with assumption. Ryan gets the spotlight. Margaret keeps it aimed at him. Thomas keeps the room calm. And I don't disrupt the flow. That's what made it so exhausting. There was nothing to argue with. Nothing obvious to point at and say, see, that's wrong. It was just the same old pattern, dressed up in holiday warmth and polite laughter. And as the plates filled and the room grew louder, I sat in my seat by the window, listening, watching, feeling that familiar thing settle in my chest. Not anger, not even sadness. Just the quiet realization that no matter how far I'd come in this room, I was still expected to be the version of me that takes up the least space. And that was exactly what I needed to confirm before I did what I came to do next. I didn't plan it like a speech. I didn't rehearse in the mirror. I didn't come in with some dramatic one-liner queued up to shock everyone into silence. I just waited. I watched the room. I watched the way my mom's attention kept snapping back to Ryan like it was magnetized. I watched my dad's eyes drift away every time the conversation got even slightly uncomfortable, like he could disappear if he stared hard enough at his plate. And I felt something settle in me. Not rage, not panic, clarity. Because at a certain point, you stop hoping people will suddenly become different. You stop trying to earn a version of love they never learned how to give. And what replaces hope isn't hatred. It's calm. The conversation kept going. Ryan was still talking. He was describing some new move like it was a guaranteed win. My mom was nodding, smiling, encouraging him with that same familiar certainty. And then she turned to me again, like remembering I was still there. "So," she said, in that bright tone people use when they're trying to sound supportive, "what's new with you these days?" It was the same question she always asked, the safe one, the one that didn't require her to know me. Normally, I would have given her the usual answer, something vague, something polite, something that let the table keep its rhythm. But this time, I didn't. I set my fork down slowly, not to be dramatic, just because I needed both hands. I reached into my bag and pulled out a thin folder. Plain. No fancy branding. The kind of thing you'd see in a lawyer's office or a bank. Ryan noticed first. "What's that?" he asked, half amused, half suspicious. "You brought homework to Thanksgiving." My mom laughed, like it was cute, but I didn't smile. I placed the folder on the table and slid it toward the center, right between the serving dishes and the folded napkins, like I was setting down something that belonged there, because it did. "This," I said, "is what's new." My voice didn't shake. That surprised me. I thought my throat would close up the way it used to when I tried to speak in that house. But it didn't. I opened the folder and pulled out a printed email, then another page, then another, a confirmation, a signed transfer document, a formal notice from my attorney. Not screenshots, not something you can wave away as maybe, not a story, not a claim. Paper. The kind of proof that doesn't care if anyone believes you. My mom blinked at it, confused at first, like her brain couldn't decide whether to treat this as serious. "What is this?" she asked. "It's the final paperwork," I said. "The project I've been building. It's no longer mine." Ryan's smile faded, just slightly, like someone turned down the volume in the room. "What do you mean it's no longer yours?" he said. "Like, you sold it?" I nodded. I didn't give them a number. I didn't need to. The number was never the point. The point was that it was real. The point was that it was done. The point was that there were signatures and timestamps and legal language that didn't bend to anyone's feelings. For a moment, nobody spoke. It was the quietest the dining room had been all night. And in that silence, I realized something that made my stomach twist because it was so painfully familiar. They weren't shocked that I'd been building something. They were shocked that it mattered. They were shocked that my life had weight outside of their perception. My mom's eyes moved across the pages, fast and shallow, like she was searching for a way to translate this into the story she was comfortable with. Then her face tightened. You did this without telling us," she said. There it was. Not "I'm proud of you." Not "How long have you been doing this?" Not "Why didn't I know?" just accusation. Like my success was a betrayal. Ryan leaned back in his chair, staring at me like he was looking for the trick. "This doesn't make sense," he said. You're low-key. You don't even talk about work." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was perfect. Of course he thought that. Because the version of me they accepted was the version that stayed quiet. My mom pushed the papers back slightly, like they were hot. "So what?" "Claire," she said, voice rising just a little, "you're saying you've been sitting here, all these years, acting like you're just working some normal job, and meanwhile you're making moves like this. I met her eyes. I wasn't acting. I said, I just wasn't performing. Thomas finally spoke, voice low, careful. Claire, why bring this up tonight? That question hit me harder than I expected, because it was so him. Not are you okay? Not what did we miss? Just why are you disrupting the peace? I looked at him and felt that old frustration flare, then pass. Because I wasn't there to fight. I didn't bring it up to hurt anyone. I said, I brought it up because I'm tired of pretending the silence in this house is love. My mom's face changed. Her pride kicked in. Her control kicked in. Her instinct to protect the old order kicked in. This is unbelievable, she snapped. After everything we've done for you. And there it was again, the script. The one that always showed up when I tried to claim any kind of truth. Ryan jumped in quickly, like he smelled opportunity the way he always did. Okay, he said, holding up his hands. Let's be real. If you just made some serious money, I didn't say that. I cut in. Calm. He ignored it. If you just made something big happen, he continued, then you're not gonna just leave your family out in the cold. Right. My mom leaned forward, eyes sharper now. You need to help, she said, like it was obvious, like it was the natural order. Ryan's been trying so hard. We've had a tough year, and now you're telling us you have resources. Resources, not joy, not pride, inventory. I stared at them, and for the first time in my life, the whole pattern felt visible, like someone turned on a light in a room I'd been navigating in the dark. I understood it in one clean line. They didn't miss me. They missed what they thought they could control. And I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam the table. I didn't throw the papers. I just said the one thing that needed to be said. Don't call neglect peace. The room froze. My mom's mouth opened like she was going to argue, but no sound came out at first because she finally realized what I was actually doing. I wasn't asking. I wasn't begging to be seen. I was naming what it was. And once something has a name, it's harder to pretend it doesn't exist. I closed the folder, slowly, and pulled it back toward me. I didn't come here to announce anything. I said, I came here to confirm something. I looked at my dad, then at my mom, then at Ryan, and you confirmed it. No one had a response for that, because there wasn't one. There was no way to argue with paper, no way to guilt your way around a signature, no way to turn my life into a rumor again. In that moment, I felt it clear as daylight. The truth had been recorded, and now, no one in that room had a way out. After I left that house, I sat in my car for a long time with my hands on the steering wheel, just breathing. Not because I was scared, because my body didn't know what to do with the quiet. You know how people say, just talk it out. Like the right words can fix anything. I used to believe that. I used to think if I could just explain myself clearly enough, if I could cry in the right tone, if I could stay respectful, stay calm, stay mature, then someone would finally look at me and go, oh, I get it now. I'm sorry. But that's the thing about families with a long history of favoritism. Your feelings don't land as truth. They land as inconvenience. In a house like that, emotion gets translated. Your sadness becomes dramatic. Your anger becomes disrespect. Your boundaries become selfish. Your silence becomes, she's fine. And the worst part, even when you're speaking the truth, they can still make you sound like the problem, because the system isn't built on what's fair. It's built on what keeps the peace for the people in power. And in my family, peace always meant one thing: Ryan stays protected. My mom stays right. My dad stays quiet. And I stay small. That night at the table, I finally understood why my words never worked. Because words are negotiable. Words can be twisted. Words can be denied. Words can be rewritten the next morning like they never happened. But proof is heavy. Proof doesn't care if you're the difficult one. Proof doesn't care if your mom thinks you're being ungrateful. Proof just sits there and says, "This happened. Deal with it." And that's why the moment I slid those documents across the table, everything changed. Not because they suddenly grew a conscience, but because they lost their escape route. My mom didn't apologize. Did you notice that her first instinct wasn't, "I'm proud of you"? It was, "Why didn't you tell us?" Which is just another way of saying, why couldn't we control this? And then, almost immediately, it turned into, "So what are you going to do for us?" That wasn't love talking. That was damage control. Because now there was something real on the table, something that could ripple outside our little family bubble. And here's the part people don't like to admit out loud. A lot of unhealthy family systems don't change because someone finally understands your pain. They change when the cost of ignoring you becomes higher than the cost of facing the truth. That's why being the bigger person rarely works in these dynamics. Because being the bigger person usually means you carry the burden quietly, and everyone else stays comfortable. But when you bring evidence, real evidence, the comfort breaks. And that's what happened next. It didn't even take 24 hours. My mom started calling, not with concern, with urgency. She kept saying things like, "We need to talk. And this is serious. And you can't just walk away from family responsibilities." Responsibilities. Like my childhood was a bill that finally came due. Then Ryan started texting fast, messy, emotional. He bounced between anger and panic like he didn't know which one would work. 1 minute it was, "You think you're better than us?" The next it was, "Just tell me what you did. Okay, we can fix this." And I remember reading that word "fix" and feeling my stomach drop. Because he wasn't talking about us. He was talking about him. Then my dad called. And my dad almost never called. His voice was low, tired. Like he'd aged 10 years overnight. He didn't say much. He just said, "Your mother is upset." And I thought, of course she is. Because the truth doesn't just hurt feelings. It threatens roles. And when roles get threatened, people scramble. That's when I started hearing the other piece whispers that weren't meant for me, but still found me. Questions about money, about accounts, about paperwork with Ryan's name on it. Things I didn't even know existed. And suddenly, it wasn't just a family argument anymore. It was consequences. The kind you can't pray away. The kind you can't guilt trip someone out of. If someone had been moving money around, if there were loans or transfers or help that wasn't exactly clean, then my mom's panic made sense. Because now there was a spotlight. And once there's a spotlight, people stop talking about who's too sensitive. They start asking who signed what, who knew what, who benefited. That's why evidence changes everything. Not because it makes people kinder, but because it makes denial expensive. And I know this might sound harsh, but I'm going to say it anyway. If someone only starts respecting your truth when there's paperwork involved, they were never respecting your truth. They were managing you. They were waiting for you to get tired and back down. They were betting you would keep choosing peace over reality. That night, for the first time, I didn't try to win with emotion. I didn't try to convince anyone with tears. I didn't beg for understanding. I simply placed reality on the table. And when reality is documented, the old story can't survive the way it used to. That's the twist no one prepares you for. Sometimes, healing doesn't start when they finally feel sorry. It starts when the truth becomes undeniable out loud, on paper, in the light. And then, the real question isn't, do they understand now? The real question is, what will they do now that they can't pretend anymore? The next day, my mom didn't show up with an apology. She showed up with an argument. It started as a voicemail, her voice tight, like she'd been holding her breath for hours. "Claire, we need to talk. You can't just drop something like that and walk away. We're your family." And then, a few minutes later, a text. "After everything we've done for you, you owe us a conversation." Oh, that word landed in my chest like a hand pushing me back into the place I'd spent my whole childhood, because "oh" was always her favorite tool. If I didn't want to do something, I was ungrateful. If I didn't answer fast enough, I was cold. If I didn't smile through it, I was dramatic. And the truth is, a lot of us were raised with that script. The idea that if someone fed you, housed you, clothed you, then you're not allowed to have feelings about anything else. Like survival is the same thing as love. So I called her back. Not because I wanted to fight, because I wanted to say something clearly for once without shaking. She picked up on the second ring. "Claire," she said, like she was already exhausted. "What are you doing? Do you know how this looks? Your father barely slept. Ryan is spiraling, and you're acting like we're strangers." I let her talk. I let the words pour out: family, loyalty, responsibility, sacrifice. And then she said it. "We raised you." She snapped. "We gave you a roof. We put food on the table. We did our part. So don't stand there and act like you're some kind of victim. If you have something now, you share it. That's what family does." There it was. Not pride, not regret. A bill. And for a second, I felt that old panic in my throat, the one that whispers, "Maybe she's right. Maybe you're cruel. Maybe you're overreacting." That's the poison of emotional neglect. It doesn't just hurt you. It trains you to defend the people who hurt you. So I took a breath, and I said, "Mom, feeding a child is not the same thing as loving them. Silence, the kind that isn't peaceful, the kind that's offended." "What did you just say?" I said. "Keeping me alive isn't the same thing as showing up for me." She laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. "Oh my God, listen to you. So now we're bad parents because we didn't coddle you. You always had what you needed." "That's the problem," I said, and my voice surprised me because it was steady. "You think what I needed was just a roof, food, school supplies." I paused, choosing every word like I was laying something fragile on the table. What I needed was someone to look at me and believe me. What I needed was to not be treated like the easy kid so you could spend all your energy fixing Ryan. What I needed was for Dad to speak up when you decided I didn't matter. And I didn't say it with anger. That's what made her matter, because anger is something she could dismiss. Calm truth. That's harder. "You're rewriting history," she said. "You were fine. You were always fine. You were independent. You didn't need much." There it was again. The compliment that's actually an excuse. You were fine, so I didn't have to try. And I didn't let her put that weight on me this time. I was independent because I had to be. I said, "I learned not to ask. I learned not to cry in front of you. I learned not to expect anything because every time I did, you made me feel like I was asking for too much." She started talking over me. Faster now. "You think Ryan had it easy? You have no idea what I dealt with. You have no idea how much I worried about him." "I know," I said quietly. "That's why I'm saying this. Because that's the other truth people miss. Favoritism doesn't just abandon one child, it cripples the other. Ryan didn't learn how to stand because you kept catching him before he hit the ground. You didn't help him grow, you helped him avoid consequences. And now, Suddenly, consequences were here. That's why her voice sounded like panic. Not because she missed me, because the system was breaking. While we were on the phone, my brother started calling me too, back to back. When I didn't answer, he texted, "So, are you really just gonna let mom and dad drown? Like they were the victims of something I'd done." Then another message. "This isn't fair. Claire, you got all this, and we got nothing. We're family." And that's when I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was so predictable it almost felt scripted. He never asked where I was when I was building my life. He never asked if I was okay. He never cared about family when family meant noticing me. But the second there was something to gain, suddenly it was our money, our success, our share. That's what entitlement sounds like. It doesn't say, "I'm sorry." It says, "How much do I get?" I went back to my mom's call. "You don't get to use the word family like a password," I said, "like it unlocks access to me whenever you want." She scoffed. "So what? You're just going to abandon us." And right there, right at that moment, I realized something that hit me like cold water. They were calling my boundaries abandonment. Because they were used to me abandoning myself. They were used to me swallowing my needs so the house could feel calm. They were used to me being the quiet one, the reasonable one, the one who understood. But understanding isn't the same as consenting to be neglected. So I said the sentence I'd never dared to say out loud. "I don't owe you my life just because you didn't let me starve." More silence, heavier this time. And I softened not because I was backing down, but because I meant what I said. "Mom, I'm not saying you did nothing. I'm saying you did the minimum for my body, and you left my heart to raise itself. And I can acknowledge what you provided without pretending it was love, because love isn't just paying bills. Love is attention. Love is protection. Love is saying, 'I see you,' before you have something impressive to show for it." Then my mom's voice turned small sharp, but small. "So you're just done." I looked out the window of my apartment at the quiet street, at the normal world moving like it always had. And I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I was clear. "I'm done being a debt." I said, "I'm done being the low-maintenance child you could ignore. If you want a relationship with me, it can't be based on what I can give you. It has to be based on respect. And if you can't do that," I swallowed, "then yes, I'm done." Because this is the part no one tells you when you grow up in a family like mine. Setting a boundary will make you look cruel to people who benefited from you having none. And if you've been trained to feel guilty for existing, they'll use that guilt like a leash. But guilt is not love. And "we raised you" is not a lifetime contract to be used. It's just a sentence people say when they don't know how to face what they didn't give you. I didn't plan on seeing my dad again that week. After that phone call with my mom, after Ryan's texts, after the word "oh" got thrown at me like a rope, I stayed quiet. Not the old kind of quiet, not the kind where you swallow yourself. This was a quiet with a boundary. Then, 3 days later, I got a message from an unknown number, just an address. No emojis, no please, no explanation. It was my parents' place. And for a second, my stomach tightened like it always did, like my body had a memory. My mind was still trying to outgrow. I didn't go inside. I parked on the shoulder, under those tall pines that always made the sky look smaller, and I sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, watching the porch light flicker like it couldn't decide if it wanted to stay on. The front door opened. My dad stepped out. Thomas Nolan. He looked older than he had at the table, not just tired, smaller. like the house had been sitting on his shoulders for years, and now, finally, it was too heavy to pretend it wasn't. He didn't wave. He didn't smile. He walked down the steps, slow, and stopped a few feet from my car. I rolled the window down halfway. He stood there for a moment, staring at the ground like he was waiting for the right sentence to arrive. And then he said, "Hi, Claire. Just hi. No lecture. No, your mother's upset. No, you shouldn't have done that." That alone felt unfamiliar. I nodded. "Hi." He swallowed, eyes still not meeting mine. "I'm not here to argue," he said. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so rare to hear a man in that house admit he had choices. He reached into the pocket of his jacket and pulled something out. At first, I thought it was a folder or paperwork, something like the stuff I'd put on the table, but it wasn't. It was a small, worn book, a savings passbook, old school. The kind with faded ink and a plastic sleeve that had gone cloudy at the edges. He held it like it weighed more than it should. "I've had this," he said, and his voice cracked on the word had, like he hated that it was true. I didn't take it. I just stared. Because my first instinct was suspicion. My mom's voice lived in my head. "This is manipulation. This is a trick." My dad lifted it a little, as if offering proof. "It's in your name," he said quietly. "It always was." My throat tightened. "What is that?" He finally looked at me then, and his eyes were wet, but his face stayed stiff, like he didn't know how to let emotion move through him without turning into stone. "It's money I set aside when you were a kid," he said. "Not much at first, just little pieces." He paused, like he was choosing honesty over comfort for the first time in his life. "Whenever I saw something happen, whenever I knew you were getting pushed to the side, I'd put a little in." I felt my chest go cold, because the twist wasn't the money. The twist was what it meant. You saw it. You knew. And you still let it happen. I heard my own voice come out smaller than I wanted. "Why are you giving me this now?" He looked down again, jaw clenched. "Because I can't pretend anymore," he said. "And because your mother thinks this is about money." His laugh was quiet and bitter, like it hurt. "She keeps saying, Claire thinks she's better than us now. Claire wants to punish us." He shook his head. I tried to tell her, "It's not that." Then he looked up again, and his eyes held mine longer. "It's about what we didn't do. I didn't move. I didn't reach for the passbook. I just sat there, listening, because something in me wanted to believe him, and something in me was furious that belief still cost so much." He cleared his throat. "I'm not giving you this to buy forgiveness," he said. "That's not what this is." He held it out again, closer to the window. "This is proof," he said. "Not that I was good, that I knew." My hands tightened around the steering wheel. I wanted to say, "Then why didn't you speak?" I wanted to ask him about every time my mom talked over me. Every time Ryan smirked. Every time I was called easy like it was a compliment. Every time my dad looked at his plate and said nothing. But my dad answered before I could. I was scared. He said, "Just that. No excuses wrapped in philosophy. No, I did my best. Just fear." "I was scared of your mother," he admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "Scared of the fights. Scared of the house falling apart." He swallowed hard. So I convinced myself. Silence was peace. Then he looked straight at me again, and his voice steadied, like he was forcing it to. "But it wasn't peace," he said. "It was a decision. That sentence hit me harder than any yelling ever did, because that's the lie we grow up with. Right. That the quiet parent is neutral, that they're the calm one, that they're staying out of it. But neutrality in a biased system isn't neutral. It always has a side. And in our house, silence always sided with whoever had the power. He stared at the passbook like it could speak for him. I thought, if I saved something, at least I wasn't doing nothing, he said, and his voice shook. I told myself, one day, I'll give it to her. He inhaled like it hurt, but I never did. He didn't say why. He didn't have to. Because I knew. He never did, because giving it to me would mean acknowledging what was happening, and acknowledging it would mean stopping it, and stopping it would mean conflict. And my father's whole religion was avoiding conflict. I felt something strange in my chest. Not forgiveness, not even relief, just clarity. Sometimes the person who hurts you the most isn't the loud one. Sometimes it's the one who watched, the one who saw you drowning and told themselves you looked like you were swimming. I finally spoke, my voice low. You understand that this doesn't change anything. Right. He nodded immediately. I know. You can't hand me a book, I said, and undo a childhood. He nodded again, faster, like he agreed with every word and hated himself for needing to hear it. I know, he said again. I just needed you to have it. I looked at him for a long time, and then, slowly, I reached out and took it. Not because I was moved, not because it fixed anything, but because I understood what it actually was. Not a gift, not a bribe, a confession with paper evidence. I set it on the passenger seat like it was fragile. My dad didn't smile. He didn't ask for a hug. He didn't say, I love you, like people do when they want the moment to feel clean. He just stood there, and his shoulders sagged. And then he said the one thing I never expected to hear from him. I'm sorry, he whispered. Not the kind of sorry that asks you to make them feel better, the kind that admits they failed you and doesn't demand you soften it. He blinked hard and added, I saw it. Claire. He paused, and I didn't do anything. That was the twist. Not that my dad had saved money, that he had saved proof of his awareness, and awareness without action is still abandonment. He stepped back from the car, and as he walked toward the house, I realized something I didn't want to realize. My mother's cruelty was obvious. My brother's entitlement was loud, but my father's silence, that was the thing that made it all possible. Because silence isn't an absence, it's a choice. And in families like mine, silence is one of the most powerful decisions anyone can make. After my dad handed me that passbook, I drove back down the mountain with it sitting on my passenger seat like it was alive. Not because of the money, because it proved something I'd tried not to prove for years. He saw it. He knew. And he still let me be the kid who learned how to disappear. For a day or two. Everything went quiet again. The kind of quiet that feels like the air is holding its breath. And then the messages started. At first, it was my brother. Ryan didn't say, I'm sorry. He said, you really had to do all that. Like I'd ruined Thanksgiving by telling the truth, instead of by living a lie. He sent a paragraph about family and loyalty, and then, halfway through, it turned into a list of what he needed, a bridge loan, a call to a lawyer, a favor that sounded a lot like a rescue, and I realized something that hurt in a clean, simple way. Ryan didn't miss me. Ryan missed the version of reality where consequences never reached him. Then my mom. Margaret's texts weren't angry at first. They were strategic. Claire, we need to talk. I don't understand why you do this to us. I'm your mother. Each sentence was a hook, looking for guilt to latch onto. And when guilt didn't bite, the tone shifted. You're being cruel. You think you're better than everyone now, after everything we did for you. I stared at my phone and felt that old reflex rising, like my body wanted to apologize, just to make the tension stop. That was the pattern in our house. The loud person escalates, the quiet person folds, and the person in the middle learns to call it peace. But here's what I did instead. I put my phone face down, and I didn't answer. Not because I was trying to punish them, because I finally understood something that took me 26 years to learn. You don't owe people access to you just because they share your blood, especially when access has always been the weapon. A week later, an envelope showed up in my mailbox. No return address. My stomach dropped before I even opened it, because some part of me still expected the world to punish me for holding a boundary. Inside was a letter, handwritten. My mother's handwriting tight, controlled, like every loop had been trained to behave. I sat at my kitchen table and read it once. Then I read it again, and I'm going to tell you the truth. It wasn't nothing. It wasn't a perfect apology. It wasn't even a clean one. There were lines that sounded like regret, and lines that sounded like self-defense. There were sentences that felt real, and then a sentence that slipped in like a knife. I did what I thought was best. That one line carried her entire worldview. If she could label it best, she could avoid calling it what it actually was: neglect, control, a love that only showed up when it came with results. At the bottom of the letter, she wrote, "Can we start over?" And that question is complicated, because when you've waited your whole life for someone to see you, even a late apology can feel like water in the desert. It makes you want to run toward it. It makes you want to believe it means the drought is over. But here's the part nobody tells you. An apology can complete the conscience of the person who says it. It does not automatically heal the person who hears it. Forgiveness isn't a moral tax you pay to prove you're a good person. It's a capacity. And sometimes that capacity isn't there yet. Sometimes it shouldn't be there yet. Because healing isn't just about releasing anger. Healing is also about protecting the small, steady life you finally built after years of chaos. I held that letter in my hands for a long time, and I felt two things at once. One, I was glad she wrote it, because I wanted the truth acknowledged. And two, I didn't feel pulled back, not the way I used to, because somewhere along the line, I stopped needing her to become a different person for me to be okay. That's what changes when you grow up too early. You stop begging. You start choosing. So I did something that surprised even me. I didn't write back. I didn't call. I didn't make a dramatic announcement. I folded the letter carefully, put it back in the envelope, and I placed it in a drawer. Not to be petty, not to show her, but because I wanted to let it exist without letting it rewrite my life. I can accept that she regrets things. I can also accept that regret doesn't mean we suddenly have a healthy relationship. Those are two different truths. And I know some people hear that and immediately think, that's cold. But listen to me. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to stop reopening the wound just to prove you can handle the pain. A late apology might be sincere, and you still might not be able to go back. That doesn't make you cruel. It makes you honest. Because the goal isn't to win, the goal is to live. To wake up without your nervous system bracing for the next guilt trip. To laugh without scanning the room for who's about to ruin it. To build a life where love doesn't feel like a test you have to pass. And if you've ever been the easy one in your family, the strong one, the independent one, you already know what I mean. So, I want to ask you something. What's your version of leaving the table? Not the dramatic, movie scene kind. A real one. A small boundary you've been afraid to set because you don't want to be called ungrateful. Maybe it's not answering that late-night text. Maybe it's saying, "I'm not discussing this." Maybe it's choosing one holiday for peace instead of for tradition. If this story hit somewhere tender for you, I hope you take one step this week that protects the life you're trying to build. And if you want more stories like this, stories about family, boundaries, and the quiet ways we learn to survive, go ahead and like this video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe to the channel, because you're not crazy for wanting to be loved correctly, and you're not wrong for choosing yourself when nobody else did.